Welcome to this conversation with Laura Carroll. So, Laura is the author of 6 books. One of them is called The Baby Matrix. That explores natalism, pronatalism, however you want to refer to it. And that is going to be the primary thing we're talking about today. And Laura is generally a sort of child-free expert as well, and has been sort of a mover and shaker in these circles for a while. So, Laura, I wanted to start by actually just asking you how you got into this topic. Obviously, everyone, discusses the topic of having children or not having children, because it's a decision people need to make either way. Everyone makes this decision either way. But how did you get into it, talking about pronatalism as like a social force almost?
Gosh, it started with my first book, actually technically my second, but called Families of Two. And this was in the late 90s, and I had been married for 10 years and happily, but all of our friends were having kids, and my husband and I looked at each other and we're all those couples that are going the distance, that in marriage, what does their marriage look like over time, when they don't have kids by choice? And so I went looking for a book on that, and I did not find that book. And so I crazily made the decision to find couples to interview, and I did. And as a result of that book coming out, afterwards and doing a lot of media and whatnot, I began to ask myself the question of why is it that society finds this choice so hard to accept? There's so many, there were at least more back then, judgments about it, and a lot of negative aspects to it as it was perceived. And so when I came across a book called Pronatalism, The Myth of and Mom and Apple Pie by two women who edited it, it was a collection of essays and educational chapters. I went, oh my gosh, this is why. So that was the foyer into it. But the more I got into it, I went, wait a second, it has much more to do than just people who don't have kids by choice and the judgments around that. It's everything. It's everybody. And why reproduction has been promoted for generations. What's behind all that? And how does it impact all of us, whether we have kids or not? And how does it impact the kids that we bring into the world? So that opened up a sea of research that 2 years later ended up in the Baby Matrix. And what I was finding and realizing, I thought, gosh, I really need to just share this. And I love the film, the Matrix, and the red pill and the blue pill. And I thought the imagery and symbolism on all that was perfect, because once you see through pronatalist beliefs, and I emphasize beliefs, you see true to some of the truths in life. And I think that's the road I've been on since then, to try to help people see that.
And you mentioned that book, The Myth of Mum and Apple Pie, and I had not heard about that book until reading your book. So I then went and had a sort of little look around for that book, and I then recommended it to someone else. They actually found a copy of it and bought one.
Yeah, but it's hard to find.
Yeah, there were only a couple of copies that I saw available online.
It's published in the 70s, and even the fact that there's copies around, you just get lucky. But it's quite a book. Yeah, it's really good.
Yeah. One of the essays, which I mean, I haven't read the whole of that book, but one of the essays that did really pique my attention was by, I might be saying her name wrong, Letta Hollingworth. And she discusses this concept of like social devices. And I found she just like carries herself with such a like gravitas in that essay that she writes. And it was so interesting that she was writing about, because obviously your book is much more recent. This is like in our time, right?
Right.
But she was writing, if I'm not mistaken, in 1916, I think. And then it's obviously included in this book, which came out later, you said in the 1970s.
Yes.
But it's astonishing that obviously certain things have changed to some extent from then until now. But it was remarkable how many things she was talking about in 1916, which are still applicable today.
Sure.
It was so interesting.
Well, we might use the word messaging more now, but she called them social devices,
Mm,
to and being critical of those devices that convince people they have to have kids. And off the top of my head, she had different categories for them. Of
yeah.
course, there were social devices that were religious, related, where you have to reproduce to serve God, or
Mm,
some line of thinking like that. Could be also just, if you don't, there'll be something physically wrong with you, convincing people like these, I don't know, like illusions of sort. And so
yeah.
some of that, may not call it social devices anymore, but it's still very much alive, that we're still
Mm,
trying to ferret through into the truth on some of these things that people think. And it's, again, not just people who don't have kids, it's people who have a miscarriage or can't
mm,
have kids, and they feel like they got to spend hundreds of thousands of dollars to do IVF or have a surrogate just so they can do it the way they're supposed to have a baby. Some of that's still very powerful today.
yeah. Do you make any distinction at all between the words natalism and pronatalism at all? Or do
You
you kind of
know,
use them
um,
interchangeably?
I think there's certainly a lot of overlap, but I like the word pronatalism because of the syllable pro.
Mm,
In that word, it tells you that it's promoting,
right, right.
reproduction, the exaltation of parenthood. It's that pushing of it. So I think it has a little bit more of a, mm, I don't know, larger imagery that comes to mind, and that's why I use it.
Mm. And what do you think when it comes to like our psychology and our way of thinking about things? And I know obviously the answer to this question will differ depending on the culture you're in, but what do you think are like the biggest biases in our psychology or the biggest assumptions we make that lean us towards pronatalism?
Oh boy, I think that the one of the biggest ones that's one way or another talked about is what I in the baby matrix I call it the normality, the pronatalist normality assumption, and
Mm,
it's basically has the tenet that if we don't want to have children, we think that there's something wrong with us, or if somehow physically it doesn't work out, or then yes, there's something wrong with this. And I don't just mean biologically, but even if it is just that, we're supposed to feel bad about
mm,
ourselves, feel guilty, feel shame, feel odd, not feel part of. As humans, we like to belong. We're social creatures. So there's these assumptions that in this normality zone that make us feel like we're out of what the normal person is. I think that's still very powerful. So is the idea that we're biologically wired to want children. And out of all the research I have done, and scholars also agree with me, there's really no evidence to support that we're biologically wired to want them. We're biologically wired to have things happen when we're pregnant, when we're there at the time of delivery, but there's nothing that physically that is in us that is innate that we're supposed to want them. That true is for a lot of people. It's hard to really see that so much of it is social and cultural. That's generations old that we've been fed for so long. It's like part of our cultural hardware, such that we think there are truths about us and about life. So it's very old stuff
mm.
to try to get past. Those are two that I think one way or another come back around and around. Now it's better today, I think, with younger generations. They see it faster than,
Mm.
say, the people I was interviewing in 1999 who were 50.
Yeah.
So that's the good news. Is 25 years. It may sound like a lot, but in the grander scheme of things, I think there's a lot that's happened in the last couple of decades to start digging away at those and those beliefs that really aren't true.
Mm. And you were saying that because I've heard this people have this sort of discussion before about whether there is this sort of deep biological desire or imperative, or I can't remember the word you used, to want to have children, or whether we have more of a biological desire to have sex. and the whole desire to have children is more sort of socially, culturally constructed around that. And I I'm just thinking how to like formulate my question, because I'm trying to think like, so does that, in your understanding of the research, is it essentially saying that, imagine someone had a child, but that child was one of these, I think they're called like wildlings, I think, these children, like in the Jungle Book, Mowgli was sort of raised in the jungle. So if you had someone who was raised, they were obviously biologically human, but they weren't raised within a human culture. Does the research essentially suggest that that person, if they're not aware of the fact that reproduction is an option, it won't be something that necessarily biologically rises to the surface? They might get sexual urges, but they won't necessarily have this natural inclination to reproduce. Is that essentially what the research seems to suggest?
Well, I don't know about the jungle, but
Yeah. Yeah, I think I maybe went off on one there. Yeah.
I
I
was
could have
putting this
simplified
person
that.
in a jungle going, well, I think the answer is, at least initially, is yes. However, if that person, or if that little person or being saw around him or herself that
Mm.
other people were having sex and reproducing, because they clearly weren't taking birth control pills or weren't thinking about, birth control, if they saw more babies being born around them and they had some social hardware that makes them want to go, hey, they're doing that, I guess I should do that. So there that level of consciousness. So I
Mm.
think there's, setting the jungle thing aside, I think
Yeah,
there
yeah.
is the psychology that I think there is more of a biological innate thing to have sex, but not necessarily to have a child. That's
Mm.
beloved religions have taught us that that's the way it's supposed to be. And in times past, that's the only reason you were supposed to have sex, is to have, to
Yeah,
consummate, make a baby.
yeah,
So God forbid you enjoy it.
yeah, yeah.
so, so I do think there's that, but yeah, you're getting back to where's the desire? Where does that desire come from? And I think it's largely what we see around us and what we've been fed to believe that we're supposed to want it.
Mm.
It's very powerful.
What do you see as the core, like, s- I don't know exactly how to word this, but the core like sources or enforcers of pronatalism in society? What are the core dynamics in society that are maintaining pronatalism? So I know, in your book you speak of it's religion, the church, business, and government. I think are the three
Hmm.
the three big ones.
Yep.
Can you speak a bit about how each of those promote pronatalism, and if there are any other sort of forces in society that are worth mentioning?
Well, I think I go back in the baby matrix maybe to the Roman times, to times of Augustus. And I largely because I couldn't find anything that goes back any farther, but the point is made that this goes back a long time to when societies and leaders of societies were looking to grow population so they could be a more powerful society and then take over more society. So it's more about the gaining of power. And so to promote reproduction was part of that, and to penalize people who did not have a lot of children was also a policy piece that fast forward, there are some versions of that today in many of our countries and societies.
Mm.
So it started, there, and then I ask in the book, well, all these years later, like, we don't really need to grow our population, although there are people who do think we should grow at all costs and never stop. So why do we still have these beliefs? And I do discuss just how it's the continued work of these power structures to find ways to stay in power and gain more power. And they all kind of feed off each other. So it started there, and that's the way I think it continues today. Religion's still very much about that.
Mm.
Business, the baby business is a huge business. And, the governments, at least in my country, still have policies that incentivize having kids rather than the other way around.
Yeah, I remember I say a few years ago. I think it was quite a few years ago now. Do you remember the Pope making that pronouncement that if you choose to have a companion animal like a dog or a cat, but not a biological child, this is like a selfish act, you know?
Yes,
Um,
yes.
and obviously that pronouncement from the Pope, you know, that maybe doesn't carry such great cultural force, because it's just one pronouncement. But the I I forget the name of the document, but there was a document in the Catholic Church which was the decree that resulted in contraception being really shunned. You know, which obviously then had the fallout in, you know, infamously in Africa with AIDS. You know, with, you know, the
Yep,
sort of, I don't know how you word it, like the partial responsibility of the Catholic Church for that, and that can be seen as sort of a pronatalist sort of
for sure.
yeah, a form of pronatalism as well. And you were saying about businesses. I know there are, in my research, because I was reading your book as part of research for a video that I'm working on, and in doing research for that video, I came across all sorts of policies that businesses have, where businesses now will literally pay people to have children, not the government, but actual businesses, private businesses.
Hmm.
And yeah, it's I can we'll get into this more later. I don't want to necessarily get into this now, but I see the future going in a much more sort of totalitarian direction when it comes to this topic. But before we get into that, I wanted to maybe ask something about maybe looking back at ourselves. So have you noticed any ways that child-free people, or anyone that's kind of critical of procreation in any way, have you noticed any ways that we still suffer from some sort of pronatalist bias, or we perpetuate pronatalism in any way, in perhaps the language we use or the ways we interact with other people? Have you noticed anything like that in people who even stand against pronatalism?
One thing comes to mind that's happening more now at my age, in my 60s, that friends of mine are becoming grandparents, or they want to
Right.
become grandparents. And and once they are, I just see that their whole lives are all about these babies.
Mm,
And so often don't, choose to address that directly of like, why are you defining your life so much around your kids? What is that about? And how, and do you notice that we have less to talk about because all we're talking about now are your grandbabies?
mm,
So things like that I just choose to not go directly at it, because I have to ask myself, what's my end game in doing so? But I do speak out to my friends about overpopulation, and that a lot of child-free people and people who don't have kids aren't necessarily in that camp of believing in overpopulation, but I'm one of them. And
mm,
so I will talk about that each child that's brought into the world, we need to think harder about what kind of world they're going to encounter, and what carbon footprint that child will have if they're born in the States, things like that. But in the end, I can discuss it with all objectivity and have a fruitful discussion with people. And next thing I know, they're pregnant with the third kid.
mm. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah, yeah.
So what are you going to do? Pitch shit on that? You can't,
Yeah, exactly. You've kind of
you have
got
to
to
be
pick.
careful. Yeah, careful
Yeah, and
about
you've got
how
to
you go
pick your
about it.
moments. Yeah,
Yeah. And
because
so largely too, I think where I would go instead is to, as an aunt or as a godmother, for example, kids I'm close to, I will make sure that they know about me and my choices, and that there are other ways to live life. It really drove, in part, my last book that came out last year called A Special Sisterhood, where I did, feature 100 women from history, from all different countries, who never had children. I don't go into why. It's more like, here are the lives that they lived.
mm,
You can have a fascinating, fabulous life and never procreate. And so I feel it's my, role in one way or another to be a
mm,
model of that, and to talk to young people about, so that they have a well-rounded picture, that you don't necessarily grow up and have to become a mom or a dad. It doesn't have to be part of the picture. So I think that's and I think my friends, welcome that, at least on the surface.
Mm. Yeah,
So,
I always struggle in sort of interpersonal interactions, with people that you'd bump into in the shop or at the gym or something like that you kind of know
mm-hmm,
and stop and have a chat with. And
mm-hmm,
I don't think this is necessarily me unintentionally promoting pronatalism, but it's maybe me not taking every opportunity to try and combat it,
yeah,
because I often feel conflicted, when you I had an instance literally a couple of days ago when I was at the gym and I was talking to a few people that I know there, and one of them, she was talking about, she had this worry about the biological clock and the fact
mm,
that she's only got a limited amount of time to make this decision. She was
mm-hmm,
considering freezing her eggs and all these considerations which are becoming much more common now in the modern day.
yeah,
And inside, I constantly wanted to kind of question the assumption she was making, and the core one being you need to have children, right? And I felt kind of guilty that I wasn't doing that. The most that I got to in interjecting was simply reminding her that adoption is an option, basically saying, look, you know adoption is an option, and that actually removes these worries about time and stuff like that, because there's not as much of, if you're going to freeze your eggs or have a child biologically, then
mm-hmm,
you're going to want to do it sooner rather than later, at least at the
right,
age she is.
right.
But if you adopt, then there's not as much of that time pressure. And I wondered if you had any thoughts on, like, how we can navigate interactions like that, where you want to question assumptions that you think are generally harmful in society, but at the same time, you don't necessarily want to be like a Debbie Downer, party pooper, someone like that.
Yeah.
Do you have any sort of like ideas on how to navigate those things?
Well, it's certainly like you're saying, situational. How well do you know the
Mm,
person? If I was talking to an older man or a younger man, I would maybe approach something differently than if I ran into this, like this woman that you're speaking of. If I were you and I was a woman speaking with her, I might be a little bit, I'd feel a little bit more willing to take a risk and,
right.
say, tell me more about like, why is it you want to do IVF? I understand the physical aspects of it, but like, so, do you want a kid with somebody, or get at like why is it that you want this so much, and see what people say.
Mm,
Just to go at it by asking questions, be curious about where they're coming from, and maybe use that once you hear somebody as an invitation to say, that the research really tells us that that's not really true. You know that, right? Like, or it's not really true. So to get into why they believe what they believe, certainly in this regard, it would be like, why is it we believe so strongly that having the biological child is best? Because
mm,
there is that pronatalist belief that you're, as a woman, you're not really a real woman unless you actually make, your mini me, and it's your
yeah, yeah,
biological child, and people, what they go through, men and women, to have that. That is old. So trying to just find a way in, and then gently challenge where it's a belief and not a truth. Just try
yeah.
that. And like I say, it would be different if I was talking to a man, or if I was talking to a good friend who's about to have the third child. I mean, I've definitely had that conversation with friends. There's not many, but there was one where the third came as an accident, and there was lots of discussion about, do we want it, don't we want it, and I was more the voice of, so you want to bring the third one in,
Yeah, yeah,
why? So
yeah.
it's situational. But yes, I get your point that it's good to try to be a little braver, and but yet be gentle too, and not have it come hard at people, because then a door is just going to slam.
Yeah, and I think it's I think it's a good suggestion to use probing questions rather than try and actively combat what they're saying,
Right,
because then you're going to be seen more as like an aggressor rather than an
right,
inquisitor, and that
right,
defenses are going to go up and things like
right.
this.
If you're
Um,
genuinely curious, to get them to share their thinking and their feelings, people like that. And if we do it
Mm,
right and do it well, people will open up and their defenses will not be up. And that certainly is, to people we don't even know very well. Sometimes it's easier to get there with them. So.
mm. So we've kind of already mentioned there's more and so there's over the past, I don't know how long, but let's say at least a few decades back, there's been more of a focus around the discussion on overpopulation, right? And within maybe like, I don't know, you're probably more plugged into this than me, but I'd say like in the last sort of 5 years, in my perception, the conversation has more swung towards a focus on talking about declining birth rates and terms like population collapse are being used and things like this. And you've got very rich, in fact the richest person talking about it, Elon Musk. You've also got people like Stephen J. Shaw, who's made like the Birth Gap documentary. So, and what I've noticed is it tends to be a more a concern of people on the conservative end of the political spectrum. I don't know if that doesn't mean it's always the case. I have seen more left leaning people who have also been talking about this
For sure.
um, as an issue. But do you have any thoughts on how the current discussions around declining birth rates are being conducted? Because I know, for example, I know you're a contributor to the website. Is it Birth Gap Facts, which sort of fact
Hmm.
checks the Birth Gap documentary?
Right.
So yeah, what do you kind of think of the modern discourse around declining birth rates?
Boy, I think it's back to generations ago. It's the same dang thing. It's that people want more people. The people in power want more people, so that it can enhance their power. Certainly, capitalism, business, commerce, government, taxes. It's all under the still, in my mind, the same tent. So the messaging still has to be the same. That there's some crisis if we don't keep growing and growing. It's pro growth at the cost of everything else. So that's the way I see it. And in reality, go to the population clock online.gov, or it's a nonprofit thing. And I think the last time I looked, it's like we have one in the United States anyway, one net gain every 16 seconds.
Mm,
So it's not like we're not making people fast. So I just think it's to me, I can't think of any other word right now other than it's propaganda again. And it's there to help us feel like we have to keep reproducing to keep our society going. And if we don't, we're going to be in peril. When really, to me, we're in peril because there's too many of us. And what we really need to be thinking about is how do we humans live in harmony and sustainability with all the other beings on the planet? We're the ones that have the cerebral capacity to think about this critically, and that's, I think, where I'd like to see the conversation go. But instead, it's just more growth, more growth, more growth. And to
mm,
get that, we got to convince people that, well, there's not enough of us.
mm,
Always. I mean, really, there's 8 billion and counting. I mean, maybe I'm oversimplifying this, but not really. It's like, you may have the birth rate quackity quack, but look at the numbers. We're making babies like that.
mm.
So.
So, because I know that people like Stephen J. Shaw, they will say that the population is continuing to climb, but at one point we will level out and then start to decline very quickly. And do you kind of take the view that this is something that we shouldn't necessarily be resisting as Stephen or Elon is, but it's something we should maybe see more of like an opportunity? I know there's a book out there that's called I think Decline and Prosper, which I think is
Mhm.
basically
Yeah.
it's basically exploring the idea that a world with a lower birth rate, which will mean a declining population, which will eventually level out at who knows where, but some lower level of population.
Right.
This is something we should approach as an opportunity. Is that vaguely kind of the way that you see things?
Absolutely. Yeah. There are differing opinions about what the sustainable number of humans really is. It could be 3 billion, maybe 4. Different scholars think differently about it. But the main idea is that we have to get off this mindset that the world, we're here to share the world with other beings. And how do we do that in a balanced way? And that means we need to get off of this like myth of human supremacy.
Mm,
Like the humans are, we rule and everything else is here for us, kind of a thing. And the resources are all here for us. And so, yes, I don't worry about, I would like to see the population decline. And okay, so even if Shaw's right, which some scholars would question his theories and numbers, even if he is right, I say bring it on. You know, I'm not for the total annihilation of the human race, but I'd like to see it continue to go down. And I
mm,
think our world would be better for it. You know, all the people already on it, and all of the biodiversity and everything else that we need to treat equally
mm,
as we see ourselves. And so I think that's the bigger challenge is to get people to realize that and not think that we as the humans we rule and everything here is for us.
mm.
That's a very powerful notion that these people like Shaw and Musk they are very much believers in that, and they promulgate that thinking.
Mm. Yeah, it's interesting. Something you just said kind of, I guess I kind of knew it in the back of my mind, but it hadn't really clicked, was that obviously someone can be concerned about an increasing human population for the sake of humans themselves, right? There may be many people that are in really crowded cities in India, for example, or Nigeria, that say simply for no other reason that this place is too crowded, we should reduce the level of our population level.
Mm-hmm.
um, but the more, and this is just from my perception, there may be other people who have a different perception, but from my perception, the more common motivation is a care not specifically about humans, although that will come into it, but it's more about our impact on the wider environment and other animals that we share the world with. And I hadn't necessarily appreciated the sort of not inherent link, but sort of snugness between a concern around the harms of pronatalism and a concern for the harms of, as you said, human supremacy. And I hadn't necessarily like appreciated the sort of those two things are sort of riding in tandem almost in many
Mm-hmm.
people's care. And
Mm-hmm.
yeah, I'm not really sure if I have a question based off the back of that. It's just something that I hadn't fully appreciated, and then it clicked when you mentioned that. The next thing I wanted to ask was, I know that we're probably never going to live in a world where pronatalism isn't a significant force, right? And we definitely don't live in that world now. Pronatalism is obviously a very significant force all around the world at the moment, and in my perception, it's growing in its power as governments and business and the church are sort of, we're almost seeing a bit of a resurgence of pronatalism, even though it never went away. There's almost a bit of a resurgence at the moment. I wondered, if you were to be able to get into some sort of elected position and you had some say, not ultimate say, but some say over public policy, are
Mm.
there any like changes you would make on the political level to combat pronatalism at all?
Well, a couple of points before that. So if we just look at a definition of pronatalism, it really is like a system of beliefs and policies that are pro-birth, encourage reproduction, exalt the role of parenthood, and all that can manifest to everyone. So I actually don't really think today we are seeing a resurgence of
Right.
that. It's this system of beliefs has been running societies for generations, and we're still there. Now, it may seem like it's more there because now in the digital world, we have access to this information so fast and it's changing so fast. And that conversation around what people think pronatalism is today, I think is often, it's not defined correctly in the media. They think it's just these policies that are
Right.
pro-natalist, and it's like this new movement. And I'm like, no, no, no. This is a whole behemoth, like this whole ship that's been running things. And so what we're seeing, like with Vance and some of the messaging that's coming out about, eugenic oriented, having babies need to be the right kind of babies now, that all is just another twist in a bigger, longer game of propaganda. So I see it as where it may be more in our eyes and in our face, but it's not necessarily what it's always been. So there's the start with that. But as far as policy goes, um, there have been some efforts in the workplace, not as much as I would like to see, but there's been some over the last couple of decades where people without children, for whatever reason, it could even also include people who don't have kids yet,
Mm.
they want workforce policies that are equitable to paid time off that parents get, parental
Right.
leave. So everybody wants to be treated equally, not have policies, human resource policies that are driven by one's parental status first. So I
Mm.
think there's some teeth there that in an enlightened company, they see that they see the power and the value in treating everybody equitably. So they have paid time off policies that people feel good about. As far as federal and governmental policies, I would probably flip them if I had the power. I'd flip them on their head, and I would incentivize. I make policies that incentivize having fewer kids and incentivize adoption, or and foster kids, people that kids that need homes, kids that are already here. We need to take care of them and help people do that. So I would probably fight for policies like that
Mm.
first, rather than continue to incentivize people to get money when they have that next kid. That helps people, think that a little extra money is going to help afford that fourth kid or whatever, or third kid, and really it doesn't. It
Mm.
doesn't really help them in the long run.
Yeah, something else you said there also just again made something click in my mind. So
Oh, good.
you were talking about how I kind of referred to it as a resurgence, right? And you were making the point that it isn't a resurgence because it's always been there in a very dominant way. And it kind of then occurred to me that this current um I was going to use the word resurgence again there, but however I can refer to it,
Like,
but this, the current phenomena with the Stephen J. Shaws of the world and the Elon Musks and the JD Vance, et cetera, and um, Trump, whatever his slogan is, "Make babies great again" or whatever. Um, so um, that kind of occurred to me when you were talking that we often refer to as pronatalism, and I've been guilty of this, right? And it is pronatalism, but often the hyperfixation on that, the current phenomenon, the current news cycle, is
mm-hmm.
almost a bit of a scapegoat for pronatalism at large because we're hyperfixating on a specific element of pronatalism,
Correct.
and because that's getting all of the critique or the pushback,
Mm-hmm.
we're not analyzing or giving due analysis to the rest of pronatalism, which is more sort of embedded, more invisible, and sort of operates on an everyday basis, and people don't necessarily notice it.
That's right.
Which is a very valid point. It kind of reminds me of in the video I've been researching for. I've been talking about uh, pronatalism and how it influences our kind of moral judgments on procreation. And I use the example of um, people with disabilities being used as scapegoats in a kind of similar way. So you'll
Mm.
often see there was a sort of storm on TikTok a few months ago where there was this couple that both suffered from the same disability. I can't remember what it is, but it was a physical disability where they both needed round the clock care. So, they could make decisions for themselves, but physically
Right.
they needed people to help them with cooking and this sort of stuff. This sort of stuff.
Right.
And they decided to have a child. And there was a big storm on TikTok about this and people questioning, they shouldn't be having children because, it's guaranteed the child is going to have the disability and this is wrong, et cetera, et cetera. And whilst I agree with the force of that critique. I think it is morally problematic for those people to have children, but I think it serves as a scapegoat because it means that everyone else is sort of happy in their condemnation of someone else, but they don't turn their attention to their own decisions and critically reflect on whether they should be having children or not, if you get what I mean. And
Sure.
they don't have to come to the same conclusion as me. It's just we need to all morally evaluate the consequences of our actions, and that includes our procreative decisions.
Right.
And I think it plays into us feeling comfortable in not doing that to ourselves if we have a subsection of society that we can sort of focus our blame on,
Right.
and say they're
Oh yeah.
unusually bad or whatever.
Right.
And often in this context, I've seen that is usually disabled people or poor people as well are often used as a scapegoat in that sense.
Well,
Um,
it's easier to judge people and look outward and see what's wrong in others than
mm,
it is to turn the finger and point it at ourselves and do our
yeah.
own self reflection and analysis. And even with the disabled couple, I didn't see that string on TikTok, but it's certainly I've heard of situations like that before of who should have a kid and who shouldn't.
Mm,
I think I discussed this in the Baby Matrix too, and I think in the Myth of Mom and Apple Pie, there's an essay in there too about how to assess your competence as
right.
parents
Yeah.
before you have a child, and so that way, and there have been all kinds of professionals, social work and psychologists. They have all gotten together and they've made some kind of assessments in the past, which I wish we would use more of these, or require people to do this before they ever get pregnant, is to look hard at, we think we want it. Let's talk more about why do we think we want it. And then let's say we're still at, okay, we know we want it. We have to be prepared for what skills are we going to have when that baby enters in, and what skills am I going to have to develop or situations to have handled in order to properly raise that child. So
Mm,
to help parents be more fit, as it were, from the get-go. And we don't do a good job at that. We
mm,
just say, hey, get pregnant and have the baby, and then okay, then let's find the money, and then let's figure it out. And then there's this still a myth of like, oh, once you have the kid, you will innately kind of know how to
yeah.
parent. And you just have to look around the whole world and go, that's not true, because there's so many kids that are there's so many negative impacts on kids from parents who shouldn't have had
Mm,
those kids to begin with. So there's more thought, disabled or not, that I think needs to go into what are we getting into? What do I know? What do I not know? Or what do I need to be privy to? Like for myself,
yeah.
I can only project, like if I decided I wanted a kid, I would go, okay, when that kid's that infant to like 5, it's going to be pure hell. I'm not going to like that. So
Mm,
how am I going to get through that? What skills and emotional steadiness do I need to prepare myself for? Once they get a little older, I think I'd be better given my experience as an auntie or whatever. But a lot of people are just the opposite. So the main idea here is to look hard at why we want it and how are we best going to set it up so we're going to parent well.
mm,
Not as many people, I think, do that as much as we should for the
mm.
kids that ultimately may end up coming into the world.
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting you say that because I've spoken to many different people who hold many different perspectives on the topic of reproduction, and I haven't brought this up to every single one of them, but I brought this up to many different people I've spoken to, and it's actually one thing that I found pretty much unanimous agreement on. I don't think I've really spoken to anyone about this that has rejected this,
Hmm.
and it's the idea that there should be some form of mandatory, and I know that's a sort of a tricky word, but
Mm-hmm.
you can go into the nuances of that, but mandatory parenting course. If someone wants to
Mm-hmm.
be, just like if you're a
Mm-hmm.
carer, right? If you want to get a job in a
Yeah.
care home, you
Yeah.
have to have some form of competency that you've demonstrated, right? Whether that's
Exactly.
experience or doing a course or something like that. There should be some form of course that provides you with a level of competency for caring for and raising a child, and that would include how do you tackle conflict, right?
Yeah.
Basic financial literacy, how to
Yeah.
cook,
Yeah.
basic stuff like this, so that the basics of nutrition, so you're giving your child the right food and stuff like that. None of this stuff. Well,
Mm-mm.
I don't know if there is a country out there that has this. I mean, we definitely don't have this in the UK. There
Mm.
is not a course that people have to go through to learn this
Mm-mm.
basic level
No.
of competency. People are allowed to just create a vulnerable being who they will then be the full guardian of, and they're just allowed to learn on the job, which seems like a completely intolerable
And hope for
and
the best.
yeah, and hope for the best. And it's just like, this just seems like a completely intolerable and
Yeah.
irresponsible way of approaching the topic of
Yeah.
reproduction. And even people who are diametrically opposed to my beliefs about procreation still agree on that,
Yeah.
you know.
Well, I write
Um,
about that in the Baby Matrix. That
yeah, yeah.
it's apparent. Just the idea, throwing an idea out there, is what if we had a certification program sponsored by the government,
Mm,
curriculum that was designed by an array of different types of professionals, and that you did it before you got pregnant, and you would be get some money, say for example, or you get a tax deduction to do that, so that you do that way before you ever decide to get pregnant.
mm.
And shortly after the book came out, I got pushback on that. It's like, oh, you want to have social control? And
Oh,
no,
wow,
I
wow.
kind of, what I'm trying to do here is have a conversation about, if you decide to become a parent, how do you ensure that you're going to be a fit parent? Let's think
Yeah.
harder about that, and incentivize people to be more conscious of that beforehand, because it's really because of pronatalism. We have this belief that you get pregnant, and then you'll just figure it out as you go. Just
Yeah,
get the babies here and
yeah, it's
start
this,
buying stuff.
yeah, it's this, you were saying about the pushback you got on that specific point. To me, that just demonstrates the level of entitlement people feel to create someone, right?
Right,
And it's like, if you question their competency or anything in any way, somehow you're sort of questioning some fundamental right they have. Now, I obviously understand people have the legal right to reproduce, obviously,
correct,
but when we're
yeah,
talking on the level of like, what should you do, not what you are allowed to do, then there should be this room for pushback. You're not sort of morally entitled in that way. This is something that you should have to reflect on, right, and
that's
consider
right,
the for and against. It's not
right,
just some sort of, you know, um, blank, empty sort of question that's just based on personal preference. There needs to be
right.
consideration for the child and what you're bringing, to the situation as well. Um,
Yeah, you're
yeah, I
getting at
yeah.
some points I make in the Baby Matrix about it's a chapter on, I call it the right to reproduce
Mhm.
assumption, where the pronatalist assumption is that we all have the right to have kids and as many as we want. And in the
Yeah.
States, it's like to live, have the right to happiness, etc. But the flip side of that is, in each chapter I go, here's the pronatalist assumption, and then I go, hey, what about this is a post-pronatal assumption that reflects more of the truths, or something that would be productive
Mm,
socially and culturally. And in that one, I think it crafted something to the effect of that we should treat parenthood as a privileged right, as in it's a
mm,
privilege to be able to have a child and be raise that child, and implicit in that is I need to be ready, when that as ready as I can be when the
mm,
child comes in. And that's what brings in, like, well, how do we get ready, and what should we do in the cases of people who aren't and who are unfit? How do we deal with that, rather than just
mm,
continue to spend boatloads of money, to take care of kids in foster homes and jails, with parents that are, just breaking the law? There's so much we pay for not thinking about it hard enough before we
mm.
do it.
Have you come across the book Begetting by Mara van der Lucht?
I haven't read it. No. Mm-mm.
Okay, but you're
I'm familiar
aware
with
of
the
it.
title. Yeah. Huh.
Yeah.
Yes.
So I mean, the book is about stuff other than this as well, but she, in a similar way, I mean, she might she might have drawn inspiration from the Baby Matrix, but um she also takes a sort of similar approach in parts of her book of taking the basic assumptions that we make in the question of whether we should reproduce
Mm-hmm.
and provides what she thinks are more suitable assumptions, in a
Mm.
similar way that you do, in this changing of a right to reproduce to a sort of privileged right.
Mm-hmm.
Um, yeah, and so I was just checking if that was sort of on your radar, but yeah, she sort of takes a similar tact.
Yeah.
Um, I wanted to ask about the future now. So the, this isn't necessarily. So I wanted to ask how you see the future when it comes to pronatalism. But what I mean by that is not like a future that you want to happen or anything like that, but how do you expect the future to go when it comes to pronatalism? Are you hopeful when you think that maybe we are moving in a direction where it might weaken somewhat? Do you think it's going to grow ever stronger, or do you feel like it's just going to remain very dominant, but the same level of dominance that it is currently?
Boy, it's a tough question to know the real answer to. I know that in the last two, say, generations, I alluded to this earlier, that I see now more that younger generations behind me, they see through some of this stuff faster than in 19, year 2000, say. So in terms of timeline, things have moved a lot faster because I think of our digital world where we're educated and exposed to things much more quickly now. So I have hope that younger people see past some of these notions. For example, I think that younger generations don't buy that just because you don't want to have kids means you're selfish. It doesn't mean that you're weird. Now, watching research over time, there's more that's coming out, polling of like people from 18 to 45. There's a higher percentage that say they're never going to have any kids. Well, I go, well, that could be, but an 18-year-old saying I never want to have kids is different than a 40-year-old, in my opinion, right? So better research needs to navigate that, and what happens over time, and do more people ultimately end up having them or not? What do they think about that? That too needs more ferreting out, and more research. But I think some of the mindsets have begun to be dismantled. And I think I know it because we have power structures that are bringing the old ones back around and trying to slam that in our face again. Because they see that more women are taking control of their lives, or having fewer kids. They want to have their own lives and whatever that fulfillment means to them. It's not just motherhood like it was in generations past. So I think some of the things we see with at least my government now is, I think in a weird way, it's a good sign, because they feel like they got to bring this stuff back around, because women are just getting a little too smart for their own britches. So there's some of that. So there's a level of hopefulness. At the same time, I think if we have leaders of governments that want control, and on many levels, and if that dials down to reproductive control, then yeah, I think it will be a step backward for societies in general. So by country, you got to look at by country too, just to and culture. It's different. I look at internationally some trends on who's not choosing to have kids, say more in China, Japan, Singapore, Malaysia. How is that unfolding versus, Canada or here? So there's a lot of cultural context in there as well. And again, who's leading the country? So very complicated, multifaceted situations
Mm.
going on all at once.
Yeah, that kind of just generated another question in me about you're referencing other countries. Are you at all plugged into sort of child-free communities outside of America? Do you kind of get any sense of child-free communities in countries that we maybe talk less about when it comes to um, being child-free, like you say, China or some
Mm-hmm.
other countries? Are you
Mm-hmm.
plugged into that at all?
I was more plugged into it when I ran. On August 1st every year, there's the International Child Free Day, which I
Mm,
coined that term in 2013. After a long lull, there was a non-parenthood day that some nonprofits in the States
right.
started in the 70s. And when I learned about that, I said, gee, why don't we bring that back, call it something, a little punchier, and try to make it a global thing. And every year we put out a nomination time where people all over the world could write in nominations. And we got nominations from Russia, China. I mean, the number of countries, it's long. And by learning about who was nominated, I
Mm,
learned about, well, where are these people in these societies? And one of the biggest surprises is one year it was a child free, I think it was on their version of Facebook at the time, but it was in Russia. And at the time it had over
right.
60,000 followers
Oh,
in the
really?
whole community. I
Oh,
mean, it
wow.
was a thing. And I thought, geez, I would have never, like, Russia. I could see maybe what's going on there, but that was a lot, I thought.
Mm,
So that's an example where it's there. It's there. Yeah. And there's, I think, more forums of women talking about in different countries, and then intersecting the countries where they're talking about the should I, shouldn't I'm waiting, I'm not sure. And, just so they're connecting, talking about
mm.
it is a really positive sign to ferret through their own feelings and to get to what's best for them. So,
Yeah, that's really interesting, and I know, just for the audience, when we were emailing before, you let me know about Karima Kerma
oh, yeah.
winning one of the
Yeah.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
So
He's an example. He won one year. I know.
yeah. Yeah, so I'll put a link to that in the
Great.
description so that people can find that. And
Yeah.
just while we're on the topic of Russia, I don't know if you've been keeping up with the latest news in Russia on this topic, but really unfortunately and a bit very Orwellian as well. They recently banned what they call child-free propaganda.
Yep.
So it's
Yep.
now illegal to basically publicly speak in
Yep.
any way
Yep.
positively about not having children or negatively about having children. There has already been at least one person who has been fined for posting what were basically, like, we would see as basically like memes. They're basically memes.
Mm-hmm.
And they posted them before the ban came into place. So the ban was
Oh.
retroactively applied.
Oh, geez.
Yeah, it was crazy. And
Well,
I
even with
mean,
the Russian group who won one year, the Child Free Group of the Year, communicating with them was tricky.
mm,
They were in a text environment that was, like, protected and encrypted, and as a winner they would get some books and some prizes per se,
yeah,
merch and things like that, free books, etc. And even to send it there, I had to jump through a lot of hoops to make sure
yeah,
it's not sent to the person directly. And so
yeah,
I
yeah,
got the vibe even then, like, whoa, you can't really be out there about it. Yeah,
yeah.
which it was even more than for our committee who chose the winner. That was even more like, no, we need to showcase this because people need to know about this, the work that
Yeah,
they're
almost
doing.
as a form of solidarity almost.
Totally. Yeah,
Yeah,
for
yeah.
sure. Yeah.
Um, that was basically everything I had to cover. My final thing I wanted to ask about was just whether you're currently working on anything on this topic at all, or what your future work that you hope to do looks like in general.
Well, I continue to take every opportunity to talk about it, and that's why I'm on
Yeah.
your show today. And encourage people like you. You're doing the right thing to, like, how do we counter it? How do we chip away at it? And it's taking on the topic like you're doing with this episode. I think people that do that, bravo. We need more of that so that people see the broader context. So I just speak about it whenever I'm invited to. I'm on social media. I'm trying to be a little more strategic, but where I am and even this morning, I commented there was yet another article about who's happy in the Atlantic. And I
Mm,
cruise liberal publications, conservative, just see what people are talking about in the media. Yet another one about, are parents happier than non-parents? And I'm like, can we please stop talking about, like, the kids are the main deciding factor on whether we're happy or not. Let's talk about let's talk about the baby who was left on in a trash can in the New York subway. Like,
Mm.
why is that happening? You know, so I take opportunities to point things out to the broader behemoth of pronatalism as much as I can. So I do that, and I'm still out there. My last book, like that I referred to earlier, Special Sisterhood.
Mm.
It's designed for a younger audience, certainly for everybody to enjoy, but for younger men and women. So I do trying to do everything I can to get it into the hands of young people, so that in later years in high school and college, they learn earlier that there's many ways to live a fabulous life,
Mm.
and it's yours to create, and it doesn't have to be this cookie cutter thing that has to have kids in it. It can be all yours. And so I had a great time finding people and all their different stories from different countries, and had an illustrator from Ukraine, which was great.
That's super
uh,
cool.
yeah, so just doing whatever I can to get that book into as many hands as possible. So
Yeah.
that's what I'm up to today.
Well, I will put a link to obviously the Baby Matrix and
Thank
also,
you.
that book as well, so people can find it in the description. But yeah, I just wanted to say thank you, one, for doing the work you do, writing the books for the Baby Matrix, and for giving me your time as well, and
Oh, it's my
having a
pleasure.
conversation with me.
I'm glad you wanted to talk about it. I'm thrilled. So I'm glad to do it.